The morning sun broke over Brisbane like a wound, splitting open across the sky. December 1942. The air tasted of diesel fuel and red dust, the kind that got into everything, your boots, your lungs, the creases of your hands. Captain Jake Dalton stood in the shadow of Hangar 7 at Eagle Farm Airfield, a cigarette burning down between his fingers. He didn't smoke it, just held it. Watched the ash grow longer, waiting to fall. Around him, the war moved in a rhythm he no longer belonged to. B-17 bombers taxied down the runway, their engines coughing black smoke into the pale Australian morning. Mechanics shouted over the roar. Supply trucks rumbled past, kicking up clouds that settled on everything like grief. Dalton was 38 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples. His hands were scarred from 100 small burns, cuts from sheet metal, the price of working with machines instead of commanding them. He wore grease-stained coveralls, no rank insignia, no wings. Once he'd been somebody. Once he'd flown fighters off carrier decks, the Pacific stretching beneath him like hammered steel. But that was before he'd told a rear admiral that the Navy's torpedo doctrine was killing more Americans than Japanese, before he'd refused to apologize, before they'd stripped his commission and sent him here to the ass end of the world to fix other men's airplanes. The cigarette ash fell. Dalton ground it under his boot and walked into the hangar. Inside, the B-25 Mitchell waited like a patient animal. Twin engines, aluminum skin streaked with oil. It had been beautiful once, back in some factory in Kansas. Now it was just another bomber, just another machine that would drop its payload from 10,000 feet and miss by 200 yards. Dalton had watched it happen 6 months ago. June 1942. The memory played in his head every night, clear as film stock. 4 B-17 high over the Coral Sea, a Japanese convoy below, 8 transport ships fat with troops and supplies. The bombers released. Dalton had watched from his own aircraft, impotent, as every single bomb hit water. Columns of white spray erupting harmlessly between the ships. The convoy sailed on, untouched. Then the Zeros came. Lieutenant Tommy Pierce went first. His B-17 caught fire from the wing root, rolled inverted, spiraled into the sea. Dalton could still see Tommy's face through the cockpit glass, mouth open in a scream that never reached him over the radio static. 3 more followed. Young men. Boys, really. 22, 24 years old. Their mothers back home in Iowa and Tennessee still thought they were heroes. Dalton had landed that day and put his fist through a wall. When the medical officer asked why, he couldn't explain. Rage had a way of going silent when it got deep enough. Now he stood beside the B-25, running his hand along its nose. The metal was cool despite the heat. Through the hangar's open doors he could see other mechanics working, their voices echoing off the tin roof. They didn't talk to him much. The outcast. The washed-up Navy pilot who couldn't keep his mouth shut. He was okay with that. Footsteps behind him. Heavy boots on concrete. Dalton didn't turn. You planning to stare at it all morning, or you going to fix something? The voice belonged to Sergeant Rourke O'Malley, 35, built like a concrete block with hands like shovels, Australian, spoke with that clipped accent that made everything sound like a dare. He'd been assigned to Dalton 3 months ago, officially as an assistant mechanic, unofficially to make sure the disgraced American didn't cause more trouble. They'd become something like friends. I'm thinking, Dalton said. Dangerous habit. Yeah. O'Malley moved up beside him, pulled a rag from his pocket, wiped his hands. They were already clean. Just a nervous habit. The boys brought in another one last night, B-17. Took flak over Rabaul. Entire bomb bay shredded. Bombardiers still washing blood off the Norden site. Dalton said nothing. Missed the target, of course. Always do. Can't hit ships from altitude. You know it, I know it. Every bloody pilot in the Pacific knows it. Not my problem, isn't it? Dalton finally looked at him. O'Malley's face was weathered, creased from sun and age, but his eyes were sharp. He'd lost a son at Singapore when the Japanese overran the island. 14 years old, killed in the street trying to protect his mother. O'Malley didn't talk about it, didn't have to. Men who'd lost pieces of themselves recognized each other. You want to say something, Rourke, say it. O'Malley studied him for a long moment, then he shook his head. General wants to see you. Which general? The one who can still ruin what's left of your career. Dalton laughed, a short bark of sound. Can't ruin what's already scrap. Humor me, he's waiting in the ops shed. They walked across the airfield in silence. The sun climbed higher. Heat rippled off the tarmac. Somewhere in the distance, a B-25 was being loaded with 500-pound bombs, each one painted with messages for Hirohito. The ground crew laughed as they worked, making jokes Dalton couldn't hear. The operations shed was a tin-roofed shack that baked like an oven by noon. Inside, a single fan turned lazily, accomplishing nothing. Maps covered the walls: New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, the vast blue emptiness of the Pacific where men died in metal coffins and disappeared without trace. General Marcus Stratton stood with his back to the door studying a map. 52 years old, tall, lean, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as Mount Rushmore. He'd flown missions in the First War, back when airplanes were wood and wire. Now he commanded the 5th Air Force, responsible for stopping the Japanese advance before it swallowed Australia whole. He didn't turn when Dalton entered. Captain Dalton, thank you for coming.
Sergeant O'Malley made it sound mandatory, sir. Stratton allowed himself a thin smile. Did he? He turned now, holding a folder marked classified in red ink. How much do you know about our supply interdiction efforts? Enough to know they're not working. Direct. I appreciate that. Stratton crossed to a battered desk, spread the folder open. Black and white reconnaissance photos. Ships in formation. Intelligence intercepted radio traffic 3 days ago.
The Japanese are moving a major convoy from Rabaul, 8 transport ships, 8 destroyers as escort, estimated 6,900 troops and supplies bound for Lae, New Guinea. He looked up. His eyes were grey, cold as winter. If those soldiers land, Captain, they will reinforce the Japanese garrison. Our boys will have to dig them out of the jungle one at a time. The butcher's bill will run into the thousands, American boys, Australian boys. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Dalton's jaw tightened. You want me to fix more bombers so they can miss more targets? I want you to tell me how we stop that convoy. The room went quiet. Even the fan seemed to slow. Dalton stared at the photos. Ships in neat formation. Destroyers like wolves guarding the herd. The Japanese Navy had been doing this for over a year. They were good at it. Disciplined, their anti-aircraft crews could fill the sky with steel. Their doctrine was proven. You can't stop them, Dalton said finally. Not with what we have. That's not acceptable. It's reality. High-altitude bombing doesn't work against moving ships. Torpedoes are too slow and too easy to shoot down. You send B-17s, they'll drop their payload into the ocean and lose half their planes to zeros. That convoy will sail into Lae, and 6,900 Japanese soldiers will walk off those ships ready to kill our men.
Stratton's expression didn't change. So we do nothing. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Dalton turned away, walked to the map on the wall. The Bismarck Sea. A stretch of water between New Britain and New Guinea. The convoy would have to pass through it. Open water. No place to hide. His mind was already moving, seeing it. Not the way it was, the way it could be. The problem, he said slowly, is that we're fighting the way they expect us to fight. High altitude.
Long range, precision bombing that isn't precise. They've built their entire defense around it. And what if we don't fight that way? Stratton moved closer. I'm listening. Dalton pointed to the map. The convoy will be here, in the Bismarck Sea, March 3rd. 72 hours from now, they'll have air cover from Rabaul. They'll have their destroyers in a protective ring, every gun pointed up, watching for bombers at 7,000 feet.
So how do you hit them? Dalton met his eyes. You don't hit them from 7,000 feet, you hit them from 50. The silence stretched out. O'Malley, standing in the doorway, let out a slow breath. Stratton's face gave nothing away. That's suicide. It's the only way. You fly that low, every gun on every ship will tear you apart. Not if you're moving too fast, not if you turn the bomber into the weapon. Explain. Dalton walked back to the B-25, tapped its nose.
This aircraft, we strip the bombardier's compartment, rip out the Norden sight, the glass nose, everything. Then we mount machine guns, not 2, not 4, 8. Stratton's eyes narrowed. 8 50 caliber guns. Browning M2S, 850 rounds per minute each. That's 6,800 rounds per minute total. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds. You come in low and fast, 50 feet off the water. The ships won't even see you until you're on top of them. You open up with all 8 guns, and you don't stop firing. You shred the bridge, you kill the anti-aircraft crews, you punch through the hull, and then, while they're burning, you drop your bombs close enough to count the rivets. The general stared at him for a long time. You've thought about this? Every night for 6 months, since I watched Tommy Pierce burn. The Navy rejected your ideas before. The Navy wanted to keep doing things the same way. The Navy was wrong. Stratton picked up one of the photographs, studied it. If I authorize this, you'll have 72 hours to convert the aircraft, train the pilots, and coordinate the attack. I know. If it fails, those soldiers land. If it succeeds, you'll have invented a new kind of warfare. I don't care about inventing anything, General. I care about making sure our boys don't die because we're too stubborn to change. Stratton set the photo down, reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope. Before you answer, Captain, you should read this. Dalton took it. The paper was expensive, official, Navy Department letterhead. He read it once. Then again. It was a conditional pardon. If Captain Jake Dalton successfully developed and executed a new anti-shipping doctrine, the United States Navy would restore his commission, reinstate his rank, and issue a formal apology for his dismissal. He looked up. You're bribing me. I'm offering you what you want, your name back, your honor. I don't want my name back. Then why did your hand just shake when you read it? Dalton crumpled the letter, let it fall to the floor. I don't do this for the Navy. I don't do this for honor. I do this because when I close my eyes, I see Tommy Pierce burning. I do this because somewhere in Iowa, his mother still thinks her son died a hero instead of a waste. He turned to O'Malley. Get your tools, Sergeant. We have work to do. O'Malley straightened. For the first time since Singapore, something like hope crossed his weathered face. You really think this'll work? No idea. But sitting here watching boys die definitely doesn't work. Stratton picked up the letter, smoothed it out, set it on the desk. 72 hours, Captain. Make it count. Dalton was already walking toward the hangar. The B-25 waited in the shadows, patient as death. By sunset, the nose section lay scattered across the hangar floor in pieces. Glass panels, steel frames. The Norden bomb sight, that precious piece of technology, sitting in a corner like discarded junk. O'Malley worked with an arc welder, sparks cascading in golden showers, the smell of hot metal thick in the air. They'd pulled steel plating from a wrecked P-40, repurposed it to reinforce the bomber's nose. The frame had to support the weight and recoil of 8 machine guns, had to hold steady while 6,800 rounds per minute tried to shake it apart. Dalton sketched calculations on a grease-stained notepad. Weight distribution, center of gravity, the equations were brutal. Add 500 pounds to the nose, the aircraft would pitch forward, become unflyable. "We need counterweight," he muttered. "Where?" O'Malley's voice came muffled through his welding mask. "Tail section. We can add ballast, redistribute fuel tanks. That'll change the handling." Everything about this changes the handling. They worked through the night. Other mechanics drifted over, curious at first, then drawn in. Word spread. The crazy American was building something. By midnight, 6 men were working on the aircraft. By dawn, 12. Someone brought coffee, someone else brought whiskey. Both got consumed in equal measure. The guns arrived in crates at 0600 hours, 8 Browning M2s, each one nearly 6 feet long, weighing 84 pounds. Beautiful machines, capable of punching through armor plating at 1,000 yards. Mounting them required precision. Each gun needed its own ammunition feed, its own charging mechanism. All 8 had to be wired to fire simultaneously from a single trigger in the cockpit. Dalton's hands bled from sheet metal cuts. O'Malley burned through 3 welding rods. Nobody slept. On the second day, they mounted the first gun, then the second. By the evening of the second day, all 8 barrels jutted from the B-25's nose like the fangs of some mechanical predator. Dalton stood back, studying it. The bomber looked wrong, unbalanced, dangerous. "She's beautiful," O'Malley said. "She's a monster." "Same thing, isn't it?" Test day arrived cold and grey. Morning fog rolled across the airfield, thick enough to taste. Dalton climbed into the cockpit, his hands slick with sweat despite the chill. The controls felt foreign. He'd flown fighters, sleek and responsive. This was a truck with 8 machine guns strapped to its face. O'Malley stood on the tarmac, arms crossed, watching. Dalton fired the engines. The props caught, coughed, roared. The whole aircraft shuddered. He could feel the weight of the guns pulling the nose down, fighting him. He released the brakes. The B-25 lumbered down the runway, struggling to gain speed. Dalton pulled back on the yoke. Nothing. Pulled harder. The nose lifted an inch, 2 inches, then dropped back. "Come on," he hissed through clenched teeth. 50 knots. 60. The end of the runway rushing closer. 70 knots. He pulled with everything he had. The bomber lifted, barely, wallowing into the air like a drunk trying to climb stairs. Every instinct screamed at Dalton to abort, to set it down before the whole thing came apart. But he kept climbing. At 500 feet, he leveled out. His hands ached from gripping the yoke. Sweat ran into his eyes. Below, the practice range, a wrecked freighter hull, half submerged in the shallows, the target. Dalton lined up his approach, pushed the nose down. The B-25 accelerated, the airframe groaning. 50 feet, 40, 30. The freighter filled his windscreen. He pressed the trigger. The world exploded, 8 guns firing simultaneously. The sound wasn't sound anymore. It was a physical force that hit Dalton in the chest like a fist. The recoil threw the nose up, violent, uncontrolled. The bomber pitched skyward, engines screaming. Dalton fought it, fought the controls, lost. The B-25 rolled inverted, diving toward the water. He yanked the yoke back, cutting the guns. The bomber shuddered, groaned, began to pull out of the dive. The ocean surface rushed past, close enough to see foam, then sky. Dalton climbed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He circled back toward the airfield, landed hard, the tires barking against concrete. When he climbed out, his legs nearly gave way. O'Malley ran up, face pale. "Jesus Christ, Jake, I thought you were dead." Dalton leaned against the fuselage, breathing hard. "The recoil, can't control it. So it doesn't work." "No." Dalton straightened, looked at the guns. "It works. We just have to make it work better." For the next 48 hours, O'Malley didn't sleep. He recalculated the mounting angles, reinforced the frame, added hydraulic dampeners salvaged from a wrecked B-24, adjusted the counterweight until his hands shook from exhaustion. Dalton watched, saying nothing, knowing that if this failed again, they were done. 71 hours and 30 minutes after General Stratton issued the order, Dalton climbed back into the cockpit. The fog had lifted. The sky was clean and blue. He took off smooth this time. The modifications had worked. The aircraft felt balanced, responsive. At the practice range, he lined up again. Same approach, same target. This time, when he pressed the trigger, the nose stayed level. 8 streams of fire converged into a single, roaring fury. Tracer rounds drew lines of light across the morning. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds hit the freighter hull at 2,900 feet per second. The effect was biblical. Steel shredded, the superstructure disintegrated, pieces of the hull simply ceased to exist, torn apart at the molecular level. In 8 seconds, Dalton fired 900 rounds. The freighter looked like it had been attacked by a saw blade. He pulled up, circled. Below, the wreck burned. O'Malley's voice crackled over the radio. "Hammer, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Dalton stared at the destruction, at the thing he'd created. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm seeing it." When he landed, General Stratton was waiting on the tarmac. The general walked up to the aircraft, stood looking at the 8 gun barrels, reached out, touched one. His hand came away black with powder residue. "Captain," he said, "you just changed the war." Dalton climbed down. His ears were still ringing, his hands still shaking. "When do we go?" Stratton checked his watch. "The convoy leaves Rabaul at dawn. You'll intercept them over the Bismarck Sea at 1000 hours, March 3rd. That's 36 hours from now." "We'll be ready." "I hope so, because if this fails, 6,900 Japanese soldiers land at Leh, and a lot of our boys die digging them out." Dalton nodded, turned to walk back to the hangar. Stratton called after him, "Jake!" Dalton stopped. "Tommy Pierce, the others, they didn't die for nothing. Not anymore." Dalton didn't turn around. Couldn't. His throat had gone tight. "Yes, sir," he managed. That night, he sat alone in the hangar. The B-25 loomed in the shadows, its 8 guns catching the dim light. Outside, mechanics were already converting 10 more bombers to the same configuration. The sound of welding, of hammers on steel, of the industrial symphony of men building weapons. Dalton pulled out a photograph from his wallet. Tommy Pierce, grinning in his flight suit, 22 years old, from Iowa, wanted to be a teacher after the war. "We're going to make them pay," Dalton whispered to the photograph. "Every last one." He didn't sleep that night. 36 hours until the Bismarck Sea. 36 hours until the world learned what 8 machine guns could do to 16 ships. 36 hours until Captain Jake Dalton stopped being an outcast and became something else entirely. Something the Japanese would learn to fear. Something he would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. The 36 hours passed like a fever dream. Dalton stood in the pre-dawn darkness of March 3rd, watching 11 B-25 Mitchells lined up on the tarmac at Port Moresby. Each one now bristled with 8 machine guns jutting from its nose. In the pale light before sunrise, they looked like prehistoric creatures, all teeth and malice, 11 pilots, most of them younger than 25. They stood in a loose semicircle around Dalton, their faces pale in the glow of the operations tent. He'd trained them for 30 hours straight. How to fly at wave-top height where one mistake meant death. How to hold the trigger down while the entire airframe tried to shake itself apart. How to aim by pointing the whole aircraft at a target and trusting your instincts over your instruments. None of them had asked why the Navy had rejected him. They just wanted to learn how to kill ships. "You go in at 50 feet, Dalton told them, his voice rough from cigarettes and no sleep. "Any higher, their anti-aircraft guns track you. Any lower, you hit the water. When you see the ship, you don't pull up, you don't flinch, you fly straight at the bridge and you fire everything. 8 seconds, that's all you get. Make them count." A young lieutenant raised his hand, fresh from flight school, still had that shine in his eyes that combat hadn't dulled yet. "Sir, what if we miss?" Dalton looked at him for a long time. "Then you die. And 6,900 Japanese soldiers land at Leh. And our boys spend the next year bleeding them out of the jungle one at a time." The shine in the kid's eyes went out. "Mount up," Dalton said. As the pilots dispersed toward their aircraft, a voice called from behind. "Captain Dalton! A moment!" Dalton turned. A man emerged from the shadows of the operations tent, mid-30s, wearing a flight suit but moving with the careful precision of someone who thought before he acted. Wire-rimmed glasses caught the pre-dawn light. "Major Elliot Sinclair," the man said, extending his hand. "I believe we're flying together this morning." Dalton shook the offered hand. "You're the skip bomber." "Guilty as charged." Dalton had heard about Sinclair, used to be a physics professor at MIT before the war, joined up at 34 because he wanted to see his theories become reality. The theory in question was simple and insane in equal measure. Fly a bomber at 250 feet, release a bomb at exactly 600 yards from the target, and let physics do the rest. The bomb would skip across the water like a flat stone, hit the ship's hull at the waterline, and detonate inside. In practice, it required flying straight and level into a wall of anti-aircraft fire while your bombardier counted down seconds and prayed his mathematics were correct. 47 test runs against a wrecked freighter, 46 failures. On the 47th attempt, the bomb skipped twice and punched through the hull exactly as Sinclair's equations predicted. "Your strafers go in first," Sinclair said, adjusting his glasses. "Suppress the anti-aircraft positions. My boys follow 30 seconds later with the skip bombs. In theory, the Japanese won't know what hit them." "In theory." "I'm a scientist, Captain. I deal in probabilities, not certainties." "What's the probability we all make it back?" Sinclair smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Would you believe me if I told you?" "No." "Then let's just say the mathematics are, challenging." They stood in silence, watching the eastern horizon begin to lighten. Somewhere out there, across 200 miles of ocean, a Japanese convoy was sailing toward them. 16 ships, thousands of men who had no idea their lives would end before noon. "Major," Dalton said quietly, "do you ever think about the ones we're going to kill?" Sinclair removed his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, put them back on. "Every single day, Captain. But then I think about the ones we're going to save, and I get in the airplane." At 0600 hours, the bombers lifted into the dark. Dalton led the formation, 11 strafers followed by 13 skip bombers, flanked by 16 Beaufighter escorts from the Royal Australian Air Force. 40 aircraft total, flying so low their propellers churned mist off the waves. They flew in radio silence. The only sound was the steady drone of engines and the occasional crackle of static. The sun rose behind them, painting the ocean golden red. Dalton checked his watch. 3 hours to target. 200 miles north, the Bismarck Sea lay calm under a sky streaked with morning clouds. Rear Admiral Kentaro Tanaka stood on the bridge of the destroyer Shirakumo, his hands clasped behind his back. He was 46 years old, grey at the temples, face weathered from years at sea. He wore his uniform with the kind of precision that spoke of a man who believed in order, in discipline, in doing things the correct way. Behind him, 8 destroyers maintained perfect formation around 8 transport ships. The convoy moved at 12 knots, steady and sure, every vessel in exact spacing, every captain knowing his position to the meter. Tanaka had escorted 12 convoys across these waters. 12 convoys delivered safely to their destinations. The Americans had tried to stop him before. High-altitude bombers that missed by hundreds of yards, torpedo planes that came in slow and straight, easy targets for concentrated fire. His gunnery officer, Lieutenant Nakamura, approached, young, efficient, believed in the superiority of Japanese naval doctrine with the fervor of a religious convert. "Sir, reconnaissance reports American aircraft activity south of our position." "High altitude?" "Yes, sir. B-17s, same as always." Tanaka nodded. "Maintain air watch, standard anti-aircraft procedures." Below decks, in the transport ship Kikusai Maru, Private Hiroshi Yamada sat on his bunk, writing a letter to his mother. He was 19 years old. From a small village outside Osaka, this was his first deployment. The letter said he was brave, that he would fight with honor, that she should be proud. He didn't mention the fear that sat in his stomach like a stone. Didn't mention that he'd cried in the bathroom 2 nights ago, thinking about never seeing home again. He folded the letter, tucked it into his shirt pocket, next to the paper crane his little sister had made for good luck. The ship rocked gently beneath him. The engines thrummed. Everything felt normal. At 0900 hours, Dalton's radio crackled to life. "Lead, this is Eagle Eye. I have visual on the convoy bearing 320, range 50 miles, 16 ships, formation Alpha. No sign they've detected us." Dalton keyed his mic. "Copy, Eagle Eye. All units. Maintain current altitude. We go in exactly as briefed." His hands were steady on the controls, his breathing even. But inside, something cold was spreading through his chest. In 1 hour, he would kill more men than he'd killed in his entire life. He thought about Tommy Pierce, about the 4 other pilots who'd burned because the Navy was too stubborn to change. The cold feeling solidified into something harder. At 0950, 8 B-17 bombers appeared at 7,000 feet above the convoy. On the Shirakumo's bridge, alarms blared. Tanaka watched through binoculars as the American bombers approached in formation, high and slow and predictable. "All batteries, prepare to fire," he ordered. Every destroyer in the convoy elevated its anti-aircraft guns. 25mm cannons, trained crews who'd practiced this drill 100 times. The B-17s released their bombs. Tanaka watched them fall, watched them miss. Columns of white water erupting harmlessly between the ships, exactly as they always did. He lowered his binoculars, allowed himself a small smile. "The Americans do not learn," Lieutenant Nakamura said. "No," Tanaka agreed. "They do not." That was when someone on the port watch shouted, "Contact! Low on the horizon! Multiple aircraft!" Tanaka spun, raised his binoculars. At first he thought they were birds, dark shapes skimming the water, so low they were almost invisible against the ocean's surface. Then his mind made sense of what his eyes were seeing. Bombers, dozens of them, flying at wave-top height, coming straight at the convoy at nearly 300 miles per hour. "All batteries, Ito," he screamed. "Depress fire, target low aircraft." But the guns were pointed skyward. The crews scrambled to traverse their weapons downward, precious seconds ticking away. The aircraft kept coming. Dalton saw the convoy spread out before him like a painting. 16 ships in perfect formation. the morning sun glinting off their superstructures, men moving on the decks, tiny at this distance, just beginning to understand what was happening. "All strafers," he said into his radio, his voice calm. "Execute, attack, run. Select your targets. Fire at will." He pushed the throttles forward. The B-25 surged ahead, dropping to 30 feet above the waves. The destroyer Shirakumo filled his windscreen. He could see men on the bridge, could see the flash of sunlight on binoculars, could see the exact moment they realized they were going to die. 500 yards, 400, 300. Through the glass, Dalton locked eyes with a man in an officer's uniform. The man's mouth was open, shouting orders no one would hear in time. 200 yards. Dalton pressed the trigger. The world became light and thunder. 8 Browning M2s erupted simultaneously, their combined roar drowning out the engines, the wind, everything. 6,800 rounds per minute, each bullet weighing an ounce, traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The bridge of the Shirakumo simply ceased to exist. Glass exploded inward, steel buckled and tore. The officer Dalton had seen, gone, erased. The entire superstructure shredded like paper in a hurricane. Dalton held the trigger for 8 seconds. 900 rounds. The tracers drew lines of fire through the morning air, converging on a single point of destruction. He pulled up hard, banking right, looking back. The destroyer was already listing. Black smoke poured from a dozen wounds. Bodies, or pieces of bodies, littered the deck. 11 more B-25s followed in sequence, each one selecting a target, each one unleashing the same brutal mathematics of destruction. The transport ship Kikusai Maru took the second strike. The strafer came in from the starboard side, guns hammering. The bridge disintegrated. The forward gun positions vanished in sprays of sparks and blood. Below decks, Private Yamada felt the ship shudder. Heard sounds he had no words for. Screaming metal, screaming men. Water began pouring through the bulkhead. "Abandon ship!" someone yelled. Yamada grabbed his rifle, tried to run for the ladder. The ship lurched. He fell, sliding across the deck as the floor tilted at an impossible angle. Water rushing in, cold and black. His fingers clawed at the metal, found a handhold. He pulled himself toward the ladder, lungs burning. Other men pushed past him, trampling, desperate. The ship groaned, a sound like the earth breaking apart. Yamada reached the ladder, climbed. The water rose behind him, pursuing. He burst onto the deck into chaos. Fire everywhere, men jumping overboard. The ocean itself burning where oil had spread across the surface. He ran for the rail, clutching the letter in his pocket. Thought of his mother, of the paper crane. Then the deck buckled beneath him, and he was falling. The water hit like concrete. Cold shocked the air from his lungs. He kicked toward the surface, broke through, gasped. Around him the sea was a nightmare. Burning oil, floating debris. Men screaming in the water, their uniforms on fire. Something struck his arm, pain exploded. He looked down, saw bone where muscle should be. His left arm, shredded from elbow to wrist. Blood bloomed in the water around him. He tried to swim with one arm, kicked. The current pulled him under. He surfaced again, choking. His vision blurred. The sky spun. A piece of debris floated past. He grabbed it with his good arm, held on. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was the paper crane floating on the surface of the water, soaked, beginning to unfold. Above, Dalton circled at 2,000 feet, watching the strafers tear through the convoy like a saw blade, each pass taking seconds, each pass leaving burning metal in its wake. Then Major Sinclair's voice on the radio, precise and calm. "Skip bombers beginning attack run. 30 seconds. 13 B-25s, loaded with 500-pound bombs instead of guns. They came in at 250 feet, steady and level, flying into a wall of fire. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns had finally adjusted. Tracers streaked across the sky. One skip bomber took a hit in the wing, fuel spraying, but kept flying. Sinclair's bombardier counted down. 600 yards, 550, 500, release. The bomb dropped, hit the water, skipped once, twice, disappeared against the hull of the destroyer Arashio. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then the Arashio lifted out of the water, actually lifted. The explosion came from inside, blowing the ship apart from within. The hull split in half. Men fell like rain. 12 more skip bombers followed, 12 more bombs skipping across the Bismarck Sea like stones thrown by the hand of an angry god. The transport Najima Maru took 2 hits, one forward, one aft. The ship broke in the middle, both halves beginning to sink before the crew even understood what had happened. Dalton switched his radio to the emergency frequency, the one the Japanese used. He spoke fluent Japanese, learned it in the Navy, back when he thought understanding your enemy made you a better officer. Now he listened to them die. "Tasukete, tasukete kure, help me, please help me," a young voice breaking with terror. "Okasan, mother," another voice, younger still, maybe 17, maybe 16. "Mitsu ga haite kuru," the water is coming in. Dalton's hand tightened on the control yoke. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. This was what he'd wanted, what he'd built. 8 machine guns and physics and American industrial might turned into a weapon that could erase ships in seconds. And now he had to listen to the cost. The battle lasted 15 minutes. At 10:15, the last bomber pulled away. The Bismarck Sea was black with oil. 12 ships sinking or already gone. 4 more burning, dead in the water. Bodies floated everywhere, thousands of them, some still moving, most not. The water itself was on fire in places, oil slicks ignited by burning debris. Men swam through the flames, screaming in languages that pain made universal. Dalton's fuel gauge read half empty, time to head home. He turned south, climbing to 5,000 feet. Behind him, the Australian bowfighters made one more pass, strafing lifeboats and survivors in the water. Orders were orders. No reinforcements could reach Lae, not even survivors. Dalton didn't watch, couldn't. The flight back to Port Moresby took 3 hours. Nobody spoke on the radio, just the drone of engines and the occasional click of someone keying their mic, then thinking better of it. When Dalton landed, General Stratton was waiting on the tarmac with a photographer and a reporter from Stars and Stripes. Dalton shut down the engines, sat in the cockpit for a long moment, staring at the 8 gun barrels in front of him. They were still hot. Smoke residue coated the windscreen. He climbed down. His legs felt like wood. Stratton approached, hand extended. "Captain Dalton, congratulations. Initial reports indicate total destruction of the convoy. This is the greatest victory against Japanese shipping in the history of the war." Dalton looked at the offered hand, looked at the photographer, the reporter, pen poised over his notepad. He walked past all of them, headed for the hangar. "Captain," Stratton called after him. Dalton kept walking. Inside the hangar, it was cool and dark, quiet. The smell of oil and metal, familiar, safe. He sat down on a workbench, put his head in his hands. That was where O'Malley found him 30 minutes later. The Australian sergeant carried 2 bottles, didn't ask permission, just opened one, handed it to Dalton, sat down beside him. They drank in silence. Finally, O'Malley spoke. "You all right, Jake?" Dalton laughed. It came out wrong, sharp and bitter. "I just killed 5,000 people in 15 minutes. How the hell should I be? You just saved 10,000, maybe more. I heard them on the radio, Rourke. I heard them calling for their mothers, kids, 17, 18 years old, same age as your son would have been. O'Malley's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. My son died because soldiers landed where they shouldn't have, because convoys got through, that should have been stopped. And now I stopped one, with a weapon I built, with my own hands. That's right, you did. Does that make it better or worse? O'Malley drank, set the bottle down. I don't know, mate, but I know those boys on the transport signed up to invade New Guinea, to kill Americans and Australians, and I know if you hadn't built this, they'd have landed, and a lot more mothers would be getting telegrams. Dalton stared at the concrete floor, at the oil stains that looked like ink blots, like blood. I can still hear them, he said quietly. I know. Every night, for the rest of my life, I'll hear them. Probably. Then what's the point? O'Malley stood, put a hand on Dalton's shoulder. The point, Jake, is that war doesn't give us good choices. It gives us terrible choices and slightly less terrible choices. And men like you have to make them so men like me can sleep at night. He walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Dalton didn't answer. Outside, the photographer was still waiting, the reporter too. General Stratton stood with them, explaining the tactics, the innovation, the crushing victory. None of them had heard the voices on the radio. None of them had seen the faces. Dalton pulled the crumpled Navy letter from his pocket. The conditional pardon. The promise of restored honor. He struck a match. Watched the paper catch fire. Watched it burn down to ash in his hand. Honor. He dropped the ashes on the floor, took another drink. Somewhere out there, in the Bismarck Sea, 5,700 men floated in oil and fire and salt water, their war over. His had just begun. 3 days after the Bismarck Sea, the Distinguished Service Cross arrived in a velvet box. General Stratton presented it in front of the entire squadron. Photographers flashed. A Navy captain Dalton had never met shook his hand, smiled for the cameras, talked about honor and valor and the American fighting spirit. Dalton stood there in his dress uniform, the medal heavy against his chest, and felt nothing. That night, he found the second letter on his bunk. Navy Department letterhead again. More expensive paper. This one wasn't conditional. Captain Jake Dalton, your commission is hereby restored. All charges expunged from your record. You are invited to return to Naval Air Station Pensacola as Chief Instructor for Advanced Strike Tactics. O'Malley watched from the doorway as Dalton read it. Watched as Dalton's hands began to shake. Watched as he crumpled the paper, smoothed it out, read it again. They want me back, Dalton said. His voice was hollow. Now, after I proved them wrong. After 5,700 men died to make my point. What are you going to do? Dalton walked to the waste bin, dropped the letter inside, pulled out his lighter. The paper caught, burned, curled into ash. I'm going to do it again, he said. O'Malley's face went pale. Jake, 8 more convoys are moving south in the next 6 weeks. Intelligence confirmed it. If I don't stop them, they land. More Singapores, more dead boys, more mothers getting telegrams. You can't carry this alone. Watch me. Between March and August 1943, Captain Jake Dalton flew 14 more missions, each one a repeat of the Bismarck Sea. Strafers going in first, 8 guns tearing ships apart, skip bombers following, destruction compressed into minutes. He kept a notebook, documented every convoy, every ship, every estimated casualty count. Convoy 2, 4 transports, 3 destroyers, estimated 2,100 casualties. Convoy 3, 6 transports, 4 destroyers, estimated 3,400 casualties. The numbers grew, the notebook filled. By mission 8, Dalton had stopped eating regularly. By mission 10, He'd stopped sleeping more than 2 hours a night. By mission 12, his hands shook constantly, even when he wasn't flying. The other pilots noticed. Started calling him Ghost behind his back. Said he moved through the base like a man already dead. O'Malley tried talking to him. Dalton brushed him off. Major Sinclair tried. Dalton walked away. General Stratton ordered him to take leave. Dalton ignored the order, flew the next mission anyway. Mission 14 was a night raid, unusual. The Japanese had started running convoys after dark, hoping to avoid the strafers. But Dalton had convinced Stratton to equip 3 B-25s with searchlights, mounted under the wings, crude, effective. The convoy never had a chance. The searchlights pinned them against the darkness. The guns did the rest. When Dalton landed at 0300, O'Malley was waiting in the hangar. Not with whiskey this time, just standing there, arms crossed. "We need to talk." "Not now, Rourke." "Yes, now." Dalton tried to walk past. O'Malley grabbed his arm. For a moment, Dalton considered swinging. His fist actually clenched. Then he saw O'Malley's face, saw the fear there. Not of Dalton. For him. The fight went out. "I'm fine," Dalton said. "You're not eating, you're not sleeping. You walk around this base like a ghost. You're killing yourself, Jake. I'm doing my job. Your job was to stop one convoy. You've stopped 8. How many more until it's enough?" "It's never enough." O'Malley let go of his arm, stepped back. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a man punishing himself. Not for what he did, for the fact that it worked." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You think you're the only man who's killed and had to live with it. I was at Singapore, Jake. I watched my son die in the street. I watched the Japanese bayonet civilians. I watched things that made me stop believing in God. And you know what I learned?" "What?"
That if you let it eat you alive, they win twice. Once when they kill who you love, again when the memory kills you. Dalton turned away, stared at the B-25 sitting in the hangar, its 8 guns gleaming in the dim light. "I hear them every night," he said quietly. "On the radio, the emergency frequency. I shouldn't listen, but I do. I hear them calling for help, in Japanese. And I understand every word, Rourke, every single word," his voice cracked. "They call for their mothers.
They say they're scared. They say they don't want to die. And I'm the reason they're saying it." O'Malley was quiet for a long time. "What did they say?" he finally asked. "The boys at Singapore, when the Japanese were bayoneting them. Did they call for their mothers?" Dalton looked at him. "My son did," O'Malley said. "I heard him. From where I was hiding, he called for me, for his mum. And I couldn't help him. You know why?" "Why?" "Because if I'd tried, they'd have killed me too.
And his death would have meant nothing. So I hid, like a coward. And I listened to my boy die." O'Malley's eyes were wet. "So don't tell me about the weight of listening, Jake. Don't tell me about the voices you hear, because I hear them too, every goddamn night. The difference is, I'm using that weight to make sure other boys don't have to call for their mothers while the enemy cuts them down, and that's what you should be doing, not drowning in it."
Dalton stood there, hands shaking, throat tight. "I don't know how to carry it," he whispered. "Then let me help you." Across 3,000 miles of ocean, in a small room in Tokyo, Admiral Kentaro Tanaka sat writing his final report. His left leg was gone, amputated below the knee after infection set in from the Bismarck Sea. He wrote with his right hand, the left one still bandaged from burns. The report was addressed to Admiral Yamamoto. It had taken him 4 months to write. 4 months to find words for what had happened in 15 minutes. We did not lose due to lack of courage or training. We lost because the enemy adapted faster than we could think. They changed the rules of engagement while we were still following the old ones. This is the new reality of modern warfare. Innovation defeats doctrine. Speed defeats tradition. And we were too proud to see it coming. He sealed the report, handed it to his aide, watched the young officer leave. Tanaka would never command another convoy. They'd taken his rank along with his leg, given him a desk job, a pension, a quiet retirement at 46. He didn't blame the Americans for what they'd done. He blamed himself for not anticipating it. In his private moments, he thought about the man who'd built those 8-gun bombers, wondered if he slept at night, wondered if he heard the screams, wondered if victory felt like victory when you listened to men burn. 3 months after the battle, in a military hospital outside Tokyo, Private Hiroshi Yamada woke to find his left arm gone. He was 19 years old, one of 1,200 survivors pulled from the Bismarck Sea by Japanese submarines. They'd found him floating on debris, barely conscious, his arm shredded beyond saving. The doctors took it below the elbow, left him with a stump and phantom pain that would last the rest of his life. His right eye was gone too. Infection from seawater and oil. A nurse brought him the letter he'd written to his mother. Somehow it had survived, sealed in a waterproof pouch in his shirt. The paper was stained but readable. "Should I send it?" she asked. Yamada stared at it with his one good eye. Read the words about bravery and honor and fighting well. All lies now. "Yes," he whispered. "Send it." His mother received the letter 6 months later. By then, Yamada was back in Osaka, working in a factory with one arm, trying to forget the sound of water rushing into the ship's hold, the feel of his friend's severed hand in his grip, the sight of the paper crane floating on burning water. He never went near the ocean again. When he died in 1987 at 63, his daughter found the crane his sister had made. Somehow he'd kept it all those years, dried, brittle, unfolded and refolded 1,000 times. She placed it in his casket. The crane his American enemy had tried to burn finally came home. Admiral Yamamoto read Tanaka's report in his office at Combined Fleet Headquarters. Read it twice. Set it down with hands that had begun to show their age. "If this is accurate," he said to his chief of staff, "we no longer control the sea. Sir, every convoy route in the South Pacific is now within range of these strafer aircraft. We cannot defend against attacks that come at wave-top height. We cannot predict them. We cannot prevent them. We could modify our anti-aircraft. By the time we modify our defenses, they will have invented something new. This is what we're facing, an enemy that treats war as a laboratory, that improvises weapons in field workshops while we wait for approval from Tokyo." Yamamoto stood, walked to the window, looked out at the harbor. "Issue new orders. All major resupply operations will now take place at night. We will use smaller vessels, barges, submarines. We will call it the Tokyo Express." "And the troop transports, sir?" "There will be no more troop transports." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Without large-scale resupply, the Japanese garrisons in New Guinea and the Solomons would slowly starve. The empire's expansion had stopped. Not because of a great battle, because one man in a hangar in Brisbane had welded 8 machine guns to a bomber's nose. Yamamoto returned to his desk, picked up his pen. "We have been defeated not by their weapons, but by their minds." He didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't. The weight of it was too much. September 1943. General Stratton found Dalton in the hangar at midnight. The captain was standing beside his B-25, running a cloth over the gun barrels, cleaning them even though they were already spotless. "Jake!" Dalton didn't turn. "Sir, I'm ordering you stateside, effective immediately." Now Dalton looked up. "No, Mum, that wasn't a request, Captain. North American Aviation has begun full production of the strafer configuration. They're calling it the B-25G. 8 forward-firing 50 calibers, just like you designed. But they need someone to train the pilots, someone who knows the tactics, someone who's actually done it. Send Sinclair. I'm sending you. I'm a pilot, not an instructor. You're whatever I need you to be. Stratton's voice hardened. You've flown 14 missions in 6 months. You've destroyed 6 convoys. You've changed the entire course of the Pacific War, and you're killing yourself doing it. I'm fine. You're 30 pounds underweight. You haven't slept more than 2 hours a night in 4 months. Your hands shake when you think no one's looking. And yesterday, you flew a mission with a fever of 102. Dalton's jaw clenched. Who told you that? Everyone told me that, because everyone here is worried you're going to die, Jake. Not from the Japanese, from yourself. Stratton walked closer. Go home. Teach the next generation. Make sure they use this weapon right. That's an order. Dalton stared at the guns. 8 barrels, each one responsible for thousands of deaths. I can't leave. Why not? Because if I stop, if I go home, then I have to think about what I did, what I built, and I can't. His voice broke. Stratton put a hand on his shoulder. Jake, you saved more lives than you took. You ended the war in the Pacific 6 months early, maybe a year. Do you understand that? I understand that I created a weapon that turns men into hamburger in 8 seconds. I understand that I'm very good at killing, and I don't know how to be anything else anymore. O'Malley's voice came from the hangar entrance. Then learn. Both men turned. The Australian sergeant walked forward, holding something in his hand, a photograph. He held it up. Tommy Pierce, smiling in his flight suit. 22 years old. This is why you started, O'Malley said. Remember? Because boys like this were dying for nothing. Because the Navy was too stubborn to change. You didn't build a weapon, Jake. You built an answer to a question written in American blood. He set the photograph down on the workbench. Now go home. Teach 300 more pilots how to use it. Make sure Tommy's death meant something. Make sure all their deaths meant something. He pulled out another photograph, laid it beside the first, the Bismarck Sea, burning, ships sinking. This is the cost. Don't ever forget it. Don't ever let anyone else forget it, but don't let it destroy you either. Because if you do, then the bastards who killed your friends win. And I know you too well to think you'd let that happen. Dalton looked at both photographs. Life and death. The question and the answer. He was so tired. How do I live with it? He whispered. One day at a time, O'Malley said. Same as the rest of us. December 1943. Dalton flew home, Naval Air Station, Pensacola, Florida. White sand, blue water, temperatures that felt like summer, even in winter. They gave him an office, a desk, a staff, 300 pilots waiting to learn from the man who'd changed aerial warfare. On his first day, he hung 2 photographs on the wall. Tommy Pierce, the Bismarck Sea. Every class started the same way. I'm Captain Jake Dalton. I'm going to teach you how to use the most devastating anti-shipping weapon ever created. 8 50 caliber machine guns that can destroy a destroyer in 10 seconds. Before we begin, I want you to understand something. He'd point to the photograph of the burning sea. That's what this weapon does. 5,700 men died in 15 minutes. Most of them were younger than you. They had mothers, sweethearts, dreams, and I killed them. Not the Japanese high command, not Tojo, me, with mathematics and machine tools and American ingenuity. The classroom would go silent. This weapon exists to end the war faster, to save American lives, to make sure our boys can come home. But it's not clean, it's not glorious, it's industrial slaughter. And you need to understand that before you ever press the trigger. He'd point to Tommy Pierce. "This is why we fight, to make sure boys like this don't die because we're too slow to adapt, too proud to change." Then back to the burning sea. "This is the price. Don't ever forget it." Over 2 years, Dalton trained 400 pilots, watched them graduate, watched them ship out to the Pacific, watched some of them come back, watched some of them not. He still didn't sleep well, still heard voices on frequencies no one else could tune to. But O'Malley had been right. The weight didn't destroy him. It shaped him, made him better at what he did. In August 1945, Dalton stood on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, watching the Japanese sign the surrender documents. General Stratton stood beside him. "We did it," the general said. Dalton watched the Japanese officers bow. Thought about Tanaka, if he was still alive. Thought about all the voices he'd heard screaming in Japanese across radio frequencies. "At what cost?" he said. Stratton looked at him. "You heard about the atomic bombs?" "Yeah." "What do you think?" Dalton was quiet for a long time. "I thought 8 machine guns were the peak of brutality," he said finally. "I was wrong." "You were right about something else, though. Innovation defeats doctrine, speed defeats tradition. That's why we won." "Is it? Isn't it?" Dalton didn't answer, just watched the surrender, watched the end of the war he'd helped shorten, and wondered if there was a difference between ending something and winning it. 1957. Manila, Philippines. Captain Jake Dalton, 52 years old, was test piloting a civilian cargo aircraft when the engine failed over the jungle. He brought it down in a clearing, smooth as glass, no casualties, then got out to inspect the damage and suffered a massive heart attack. O'Malley came to the funeral, flew from Brisbane, stood in the Florida sun and cried like a child. They found a note on Dalton's desk in his Pensacola office, handwritten, dated 1945. "We built them fast because men were dying faster." That was all it said. O'Malley took the note, folded it, placed it in the casket along with a wrench, the first wrench they'd used on the B-25. "Rest easy, mate," he whispered. "You carried enough." The legacy Dalton left behind spread like ripples in water. In the early 1960s, the Air Force developed the AC-47 Spooky gunship. 3 miniguns firing from the side doors of a transport plane, 6,000 rounds per minute. The principle was the same: turn the aircraft into a weapon platform. Engineers who worked on it cited Dalton's work as inspiration. By 1972, the AC-130 Spectre took the concept further, a C-130 cargo plane armed with 40mm cannons and a 105mm howitzer, flying artillery, devastating and precise. In 1977, the A-10 Warthog entered service, built around the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, 30mm rounds, 3,900 per minute. The entire aircraft designed to support a single gun. The chief engineer told reporters, "We're just finishing what a mechanic in Brisbane started in 1943. He proved that airplanes don't just deliver weapons, they can be weapons." The lineage was clear, from Dalton's 8 machine guns to modern gunships, from improvisation in a hangar to doctrine taught at every Air Force academy in the world. Innovation that changed warfare forever. Innovation bought with 5,700 lives in 15 minutes. 2024, the National Museum of the United States Air Force. Dayton, Ohio. A B-25. Mitchell hangs suspended from the ceiling in the main hall. 8 machine guns protrude from its nose. A plaque beneath reads, "Captain Jake Dalton's Strafer," the aircraft that revolutionized anti-shipping warfare and shortened the Pacific War. March 1943, an old man stands beneath it, 95 years old, stooped, leaning on his grandson for support. He'd been one of Dalton's students. 1944, flew 23 missions, came home. "Grandpa," the boy says, staring up at the guns, "why did they need 8? The old man looks up at the aircraft, at the guns, remembers the sound they made, remembers the ships burning, remembers Captain Dalton standing in front of the class, hands shaking, teaching them how to kill efficiently. Because war doesn't give you good choices, son. It gives you terrible choices and slightly less terrible choices. Those 8 guns were less terrible than the alternative. Did they work? They saved 50,000 American lives, maybe more. Then Captain Dalton was a hero. The old man closes his eyes, hears Dalton's voice across 70 years. This weapon exists to save lives. But it's not clean. It's not glorious. Don't ever forget the cost. No, he says to his grandson, there were no heroes, just men doing terrible things for necessary reasons. But you stopped the war. We shortened it. There's a difference. The boy thinks about this. Was it worth it? The old man looks up at the B-25, at the 8 guns, remembers the strafers screaming across the Bismarck Sea, remembers Captain Dalton standing in the classroom, hands shaking, teaching them how to kill efficiently, remembers coming home when so many didn't. Ask me again when you're my age, man, he says. Maybe by then I'll know. They walk toward the exit. The museum empties, the lights dim. The B-25 hangs in silence. And somewhere in the darkness beneath it, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the rhythm of 8 machine guns firing in perfect synchronization, the sound of innovation, the sound of slaughter, the sound of men like Jake Dalton who changed the world and paid for it in sleepless nights and voices they could never silence.
6,800 rounds per minute, 15 minutes of hell, a lifetime of wait, the math that ends wars, the cost that never does.